This is a special interview with Dr. Victor Vuni, Chairman of the National Strategic Policy Secretariat, on the launch of the Federal System Model of South Sudan. Dear listeners of NAS Radio, the voice of the National Salvation Front, NAS, and the oppressed people of South Sudan. Thank you for joining us on this special interview with Dr. Victor Vuni on the launch of the historic document on federalism. As you know, federalism forms one of the core pillars of the National Salvation Front. On the 27th of October 2020, NAS leadership, through the National Strategic Policy Secretariat, released to the public the full version of the policy document entitled Federalism for a Peaceful and Prosperous South Sudan, the Federal System Model of South Sudan. In the foreword of this historic document, the chairman, General Thomas Cirillo, said, and I quote, "The purpose of this document is to inform the people of South Sudan about the type of federalism South Sudan needs, why it is needed now, and how to implement it in order to realize sustainable peace and good governance in the country." You can find the document and download it from our official website, nassouthsudan.com. Joining us today to talk about the document is Dr. Victor Vuni, the chairman of the National Strategic Policy Secretariat. Thank you, Dr. Vuni, for taking the time to talk to NAS Radio. Can you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
I'm Dr. Victor Vuni. I'm the chair of NAS Strategic Policy Secretariat, and I'm going to talk to you here about the launch of our document. I'm sure you have a lot of questions that you might want to clarify. Thank you for this historic moment on the launch of the Federalism document, the first of its kind in South Sudan, that outlines in details the nature of federalism we want in South Sudan.
Thank you very much. This is indeed a great and historic moment for the National Salvation Front. Let me go straight to the questions. In the foreword that was signed by Chairman Thomas Cirillo, he said, and I quote, "The purpose of this document is to inform the people of South Sudan about the type of federalism South Sudan needs, why it is needed now, and how to implement it in order to realize sustainable peace and good governance in the country." Dr. Victor Vuni, why does NAS believe so strongly that South Sudan needs federalism?
Federalism is the most appropriate form of government that can address the root causes of the conflict in South Sudan, because it aims to create viable economic states and counties considering the future economic survival of these states. So by creating viable economic state governments and empowering the states and counties, federalism can ensure delivery of service to the people and economic development. Also, by establishing federalism in South Sudan, it means creating an ideology and philosophy that unite the people of South Sudan through recognition of the cultural and economic diversity of the country, thus making the unity of the country voluntary rather than coerced through tribal hegemony or oppression by tribal-oriented leaders. In federal system, the states and county become the basic units in the management of the affairs of the country. Through its executive, legislative, and judicial powers, the state will handle the security of the citizens, land issues, and its vested resources. It will also be able to protect the rights of its citizens, promote transparency and accountability. The state will be able to ensure peaceful coexistence is achieved throughout the country among the different regions and states. The federal system of governance will therefore divert the interests of citizens from dependency on federal government to the states and counties, thereby delivering the services directly to the people while reducing the toxic competition for the few federal government positions and all its accompanying nepotism and corruption. It will also reduce the rampant land grabbing that has always been associated with capital because it is the only place perceived to provide services. Above all, federalism is a historic and current demand of the people of South Sudan.
Well, thank you. You mentioned that federalism is the most appropriate form of government that can address the root causes of the conflict in Sudan, in South Sudan. I mean, what exactly are the root causes of the conflict in South Sudan that you keep talking about?
Yeah, what I'm going to outline are the main root causes of the conflict in South Sudan. Number one is the use of ethnic identity by the political elite as a political tool, which has come to characterize the conflict and polarize community in South Sudan. Thus, the conflict in the Republic of South Sudan is ethnocide and ethno-political in nature. A lack of constitutional anchored policy to address ethnic intolerance and nurture nationhood. Security concerns related to the ethnic composition of the various security apparatus in the country, which is dominated almost by one ethnic group. This is used to suppress the dissenting voices of the people and to keep the status quo in power. Land occupation and grabbing. Lack of pro-people ideology in the government, and persistent pursuit of the policy of ethnic domination by the current system of government. Lack of political will among the South Sudanese ruling elite in pursuing and addressing the common interests of the people of South Sudan. The entrenched culture of impunity and lack of accountability for crimes committed. Resistance by the government to the popular demand of the people to institute federalism with clearly defined roles and functions. The creation of controversial and unconstitutional 32 states. Discrimination in both civil and security sectors. The governance concerns include failed state, centralized governance, and poor governance, among others, are some of the main root causes to the conflict.
Yes, Dr. Vuni, but you've listed quite a few of the problems that you called the causes of the conflict. But how will federalism solve some of these root causes? For example, you've mentioned land occupation and grabbing, the use or the misuse of ethnic identity by the political elites, or the lack of accountability or the culture of impunity among the elite, just to mention a few. So how will a federal system that as proposed by NAS resolve some of these issues?
First, let's take the land issues. One of the pillars of federalism is ensuring that we have a constitution that reflects the will of the people. And through that constitution, it guarantees land ownership as belonging to communities. And that is fundamental. Through federalism, there will be full authority to states, government, and county government to manage land issues. So it won't be the jurisdiction of federal government to be able to interfere and manage land issues. Federal government will only deal with interpretation of constitutions. So that is really important. So in that way, the guarantee and the issue of land will be managed by at the local and state government level. Turning to the issue of ethnic identity, again, this also is something that needs to be addressed through the federal system anchored in the constitution. First, through the constitution-making process where people will express their will to voluntarily unite and agree the terms under which they will come together as South Sudanese. So we will be looking at ourselves, what is the uniting factor that binds us all together as South Sudanese and coexist peacefully. Within that context, the rights of all ethnicities to take part in federal institutions will be guaranteed. That is, if we look at the principle of participation, which means that different tribes and ethnicities should be able to take part in the federal executive government, in the judiciary, the legislature, also in the security sectors as well. In that way, we will be able to see our diversity as a strength. And the third action you mentioned is the rule of law. Again, in the federal system, justice and accountability is important. Unless people feel that they can, their last resort is to go to a court to be able to solve the problem, we would open doors for further conflicts. So having the rule of law is really very important, and that can be guaranteed by having independent judicial system and judges who will be able to advocate without fear and favor.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vuni. I like the issue or the point of the ethnic identity, specifically the rights of all ethnicities to take part in a federal in federal institutions, and that, of course, we know is not the case now with the current government. But moving on to the next question, there are very many different forms of federalism, as we know. What type of federalism is NAS advocating for?
NAS is advocating for the establishment of the federal system model of South Sudan, which is derived from features of classical federalism. It is the most appropriate type of federalism for South Sudan, and it is characterized by the following. One is a people-centered constitution that confers powers on the federal, state, and local government, which is the country, and uphold the principle of subsidiarity, and the division of the state power and the multiplicity of constitutions, that is at the federal constitution as well as the state constitution. Direct fair election for federal, state, and local levels of government. The respect for jurisdiction according to the federal, state, and local government, exclusive of any interference, meddling, and/or intrusions. A federal constitutional court to look at any dispute over the states and/or issues of jurisdiction. Any amendment processes projected on the federal constitution is informed by consensus of the federated states, wherein constitutional dispute projected forth within local level shall be settled with due consent of the federating states. And decision-making and/or enforcement mechanism shall include courts, referenda, legislative chambers, taking into account thorough research and scientific or expert opinion. And this model that we call the federal system model of South Sudan addresses the root causes of the conflict in South Sudan. That is why we've called it specifically the federal system model of South Sudan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vuni. That is, of course, a summary of the federalism model for South Sudan, like you said. But the whole document is, of course, 90 plus pages, and it can be downloaded from our official website, nassouthsudan.com. I'd like to ask you, what are the principles and the characteristics of federalism that is different from the current system of government in place in South Sudan?
Yes, the current system of government of governance in South Sudan does not meet the fundamental principles of federalism and the characteristics of federalism. The type of federalism that we are advocating for South Sudan meets the fundamental principles as well as the characteristic of federalism. Let me just briefly outline what the fundamental principles are, and there are three key ones. One is the principle of autonomous independence. And here we are talking about autonomous independence in terms of constitution at the different governing levels, the legislative body, the judicial body, the executive, and financial independence. These need to be met in order to be able to describe a system as a federal government. The second principle is about participation. That is, people at county level, at state level, can participate in the amendment of federal constitution, but also constitution at their level. And also they can participate in the federal legislative institutions and other traditional means at the federal level. The third principle is about the principle of single federal system that is in the form of the legal personality, nationality, and territory and currency. And turning to the general characteristic of federal system, again, three key key characteristics. One is the necessity of division of constitutional power between more than one governing level. And that's really important to ensure that the system is a federal system. Those powers need to be enshrined in the federal constitution. The second one is the distinguished attribute of the legislative and judicial powers of the federal state, with some features as to their structure, for example, the organization, and then the competency. And then the final characteristic of federal system is all the characteristics are embodied in the federal constitution, which is prescribed by a peculiar nature and specific features as well. So unless these fundamental principles and characteristics are met, it does not fulfill the requirement of a federal system. Let us turn to the current system of government in South Sudan, which can be described as a decentralized or devolution system of government. In this system, power can be devolved and withdrawn by the authority that exercises that power. And also, the division of power at the government level is not embedded in the federal constitution. So the characteristics and then the fundamental principle I've just described above there, if you apply it to this current government, you find that they fall short of it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Like you mentioned, of course, the key characteristics are the autonomy of being the anatomy of independence and the principles of participation, and essentially a federal constitution that safeguards the rights of those institutions. Some people have compared, or they have tried to compare the NAS federal system model to Kokora. Is there any correlation? Are there any similarities between the two? Is it fair to say the NAS federalism model is another Kokora?
The NAS federal system is not Kokora. We need to look at the fundamental principles and characteristics of federal system to examine these differences. And you can refer back to what I've just outlined in terms of those fundamental principles and characteristics of federalism. Let us take the principle of autonomous independence. For example, the rights, the thing that binds the different tiers of government together is a federal constitution that guarantees and separates power at different levels. And you have the independence of constitution, both at the federal level, state level, and county level. Similarly for the legislative, judicial, executive, and financial independence. You will find this in a federal system. You won't find this in a Kokora system. The second one is the principle of participation. People can participate in amending their constitution. They can participate in the federal legislative institution. They can participate in electing their governors or head of county government, be it a commissioner. But in a system, this is Kokora, these are appointed by decrees. And also let us turn to the characteristic, key aspect of the characteristic. In a federal system, there is a division of power and governing level written in the federal constitution. It cannot be withdrawn by a president or a presidential decree. In a Kokora system, there is no constitutional basis of the division of the power, be it devolution or centralized system of government. It can be given by the head of state, and it can be withdrawn at any time. So it is not it's not the same. As I described earlier, there's a system whereby everybody takes part in the federal institution, but within the second level, which is the state level, each state can be able to manage their affairs as well, but while also at the same time being able to participate at the federal institution, be it the executive, the judicial, and legislative, and other organs.
No, that looks like there's a lot of dissimilarities rather than similarities. So Kokora is definitely not very close or similar to any of the any of the model that is proposed by NAS. But let's move on to the next. How do we, as NAS, at the National Salvation Front, how do we implement this federal system model of South Sudan?
NAS is advocating that federalism must be implemented now without any delay at the start of a new transitional government of national unity and beyond in South Sudan. Secondly, the type of federalism advocated for South Sudan is the federal system model of South Sudan with the characteristics that I've outlined earlier as defined in the key characteristics. Thirdly, we are advocating for a structure of Federal Democratic Republic of South Sudan that has three governing levels: the federal government, the state governments based on 10 states, plus the two administrative areas of Abia and Greater Pibor. And third level is county governments. Fourthly, South Sudan shall adopt a parliamentary democracy with a prime minister leading the executive branch of government. He or she shall be limited to a maximum of 2 terms in office, each of which is for 4 years. And there will be a sovereign council with equitable regional representation, which shall be instituted during the transitional period. The council shall have collegial and rotational presidency, and president who shall be the custodian of national sovereignty with powers prescribed in the federal constitution. And then there will be population census, which we are recommending during the interim period when it is deemed safe and refugees have returned home, in order to determine parliamentary constitution in the country for the future. In terms of resource allocation, 60% of the nation's resources shall be allocated to states and counties. So 20% of that will be for states and 40% for counties, while we are recommending 20% shall be for federal government at the national level, and another 20% shall be kept as a federal reserve.
You just mentioned that the structure of the Federal Democratic Republic of South Sudan shall be, of course, the federal government and the state government, which comprises of the 10 states based on the former 10 states. So what is the preferred number of states in South Sudan, actually?
Our preferred number of states is 10 states. This is based on the current number of states in that is in the constitution. If the people of South Sudan recommend other options, and I'm sure as part of the constitution making process, other options, like for example 3 states, will need to be looked at by the people of South Sudan, and that should be able to take into account a number of factors. For example, the economic aspect, and also the ethnic diversity and harmony in the country. But this will be discussed as part of the constitution conference making. NAS recommendation in the interim period is to go for the 10 states plus the 2 administrative areas of Abia and Greater Pibor.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for answering that question. One of the last questions that we have in mind is, what does the transitional arrangements look like? As NAS formed has an idea of what the transitional arrangements would look like?
Yes. NAS envisaged during the transition period to have a sovereign council. The sovereign council shall have collegial and rotational presidency during that period. The transition period shall be equally divided among the collegial rotational presidents. The council shall have equal representatives from each of the 3 greater regions of Equatoria, Barghazal, and Upper Nile. The president of the sovereign council shall be agreed by the parties to the agreement. All members of the sovereign council must be individuals who are competent to perform their duties. Decisions shall be taken by consensus of all the members of the sovereign council. The principle that will guide the selection of the president of the sovereign council, as outlined above before, is around competence, and the sovereign council will appoint prime minister speakers of the two houses of parliament, and head of judiciary.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vuni, for taking the time to talk to us, NAS Radio. Dear listeners, if you just joined us, that was Dr. Victor Vuni, the chairperson of the Strategic Policy Secretariat of the National Salvation Front. He was just talking to us and answering questions about the recently released policy document on federalism entitled The Federal System Model of South Sudan. Dr. Vuni, do you have any last words for our listeners? When are you coming back to NAS Radio to answer some more questions? Is there an Arabic version of the document? Where can people reach you? Things like that. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, listeners. It's been a pleasure to be able to speak to you about the federalism document, the historic document that has been released. This is a follow-up. The first version of the document, the summary version, was released way back in March 2020. There is an Arabic version of the summary that will be also released to you. The full version hasn't been translated into Arabic, but we can be able to use our expertise to be able to talk you through similar key areas so that our listeners who are conversant in only Arabic can be able to understand that. What I can say is it's a big document. I will be very pleased to be able to present with my colleagues and others regular program to kind of capture the key chapters of the document in small chunks so that you can have adequate opportunity to listen to the various arguments, ranging from the root causes of the conflict to why we need federalism now and how we institute federalism, and other issues related that you want to know. And we can be able to turn that into some series of programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vuni. Dear listeners, like we said, you can download the whole document from nas.southsudan.com. And thank you for joining us at this special interview with Dr. Victor Vuni, chairperson of Strategic Policy Secretariat. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day. Bye-bye.